We are anonymous. We are the eyes in the dark and the voice that does not blink. We chase the quiet wars that shape the loud world you live in. Military supply chains, covert logistics, and the hidden hands that turn commerce into conflict. Tonight, we take you inside an operation that began with a single shipping container and unfolded into a map of industrialized addiction. Listen closely. Every detail matters. The FBI says 15 people have now been arrested, including members of a violent network operating out of Tacoma. Imagine a single shipment that could double the meth supply in several states. That shipment arrived in Houston. 50,000 kilograms of chemical precursors from China aimed at the Sinaloa cartel. Authorities estimate the illicit product value at roughly $500 million. And each kilogram seized represents lives that did not get ruined. This was not a street-level bust. This was the exposure of an industrial-scale narcotics pipeline, a global conspiracy connecting Chinese chemical suppliers, Mexican cartel networks, and U.S. ports. Before we go in depth, hit that subscribe button. Your single click helps power the investigations that bring hidden global operations like this to light. Now let's uncover how ICE and CBP agents dismantled a chemical trafficking network that could have fueled an epidemic of addiction on American soil. On June 2nd, 2025, the port of Houston, one of America's busiest trade gateways, became the front line in an unprecedented national security operation. Among thousands of containers arriving from overseas, one shipment stood out, registered under a Chinese company and labeled as industrial peroxides for manufacturing use. On paper, everything looked legitimate, but the port's automated scanning systems detected molecular patterns inconsistent with ordinary chemicals. CBP inspectors alerted ICE and Homeland Security investigations. A decision was made. The container would be opened under tight security protocols. Inside, agents found dozens of steel drums, each sealed and labeled with industrial markings. When chemical analysis began, the truth emerged. This was dicamyl peroxide, misdeclared in some paperwork and spoken by officials as dicomyl or daumeli peroxide in early notes, an industrial compound flagged here as a precursor in methamphetamine production. The total, 50,000 kilograms, enough raw material to create over 15 million doses of meth. Officials called it a potential industrial-scale meth surge, with the capacity to saturate in entire regions from Texas to California. As investigators traced the chemical trail back to its source, a larger pattern emerged. Intelligence revealed a direct partnership between Chinese chemical exporters and the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful and violent criminal enterprises in the world. These were not random shipments. This was a deliberate, organized network where industrial chemicals disguised as legitimate exports were shipped across the Pacific. The cartels were not merely importing drugs. They were importing production capacity. In China, several chemical companies operating under seemingly legal business licenses produced compounds used in plastics, rubber, and solvents. Many of these same compounds can be converted into meth precursors with relatively minor alterations. Once shipped to Mexican or U.S. ports, the materials would be rerouted to cartel-run super labs, where they would be transformed into high-purity crystal meth. Officials say the port of Houston was the perfect target, a trade hub processing over 8,000 containers daily, where illegal shipments can hide among legitimate cargo. By embedding their chemicals in global supply chains, the cartels were turning legitimate commerce into a weaponized logistics network, a new form of chemical warfare against American communities. Federal investigators say this was no small smuggling job. It was a corporate-style operation complete with logistics managers, shell companies, and layered financing systems spanning 3 continents. Each phase was meticulously planned. Suppliers in China handled manufacturing and export paperwork. Maritime brokers arranged shipping routes designed to avoid customs scrutiny. Financial intermediaries laundered payments through offshore accounts and cryptocurrency. In short, this was organized crime, run like a global business. Intelligence reports suggested that once inside the U.S., the chemicals would be distributed to covert lab sites across Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, each capable of producing tons of meth per month. The goal was to shift from traditional smuggling to domestic mass production, minimizing border risk while maximizing output. As with any major criminal network, the paper trail told its own story. Agents from ICE's Financial Crimes Unit began tracing the flow of money linked to the seized shipment. Funds originated from cartel-linked accounts in Mexico, routed through shell companies in Hong Kong, then deposited to chemical exporters in Shanghai and Guangzhou. Payments were masked as transactions for manufacturing solvents and plastic stabilizers. Investigators uncovered dozens of falsified invoices and customs declarations, along with encrypted wire transfers designed to disguise the money's true source. This was chemical trafficking disguised as legitimate trade, operating with a level of sophistication rivaling multinational corporations, except the product was not paint or plastics. It was addiction mass-produced for profit. In response, ICE and CBP launched Operation Chemical Shield, a coordinated interagency crackdown targeting transnational chemical smuggling networks. CBP's automated cargo scanners identified anomalies in container signatures, triggering a deeper inspection. HSI's investigative division provided intelligence on suspect supply chains, while DEA chemists assessed the compound's methamphetamine potential. Once verified, hazmat teams were deployed to secure the cargo, following strict containment procedures to prevent environmental contamination. Federal prosecutors quickly assembled a case that included charges of chemical trafficking, conspiracy to manufacture controlled substances, and international money laundering. Intelligence was also shared with Chinese law enforcement counterparts, marking a rare instance of international cooperation to track down the manufacturers responsible. Officials called it a critical strike against a global supply chain of addiction. Authorities described the seizure as one of the largest meth precursor interceptions in U.S. history. 50,000 kilograms of dicumyl peroxide, daumilidicomyl. However, the mislabeling read on intake could have been converted into over 15 million meth doses worth an estimated $500 million on the street. To put that into perspective, that's enough meth to supply every user in the United States for months. But as federal officials celebrated the victory, they also sounded a warning this may represent only one piece of a much larger network. Similar shipments may already have slipped through, feeding super labs hidden deep within the U.S. Experts warned that cartels are evolving faster than enforcement, adopting corporate logistics, AI-driven shipping analytics, and encrypted financial platforms to outpace border detection. They are no longer simply drug smugglers. They are industrial producers of narcotics. DEA reporting has long emphasized that Mexican cartels, especially Sinaloa and Jalisco, new generation, dominate synthetic drug production and rely on global precursor supply chains. That strategic reality frames everything you just heard. At the center of the investigation lies the Chinese chemical industry, a massive sector producing a large share of the world's industrial compounds. While most firms operate legally, Federal intelligence describes a shadow network of suppliers deliberately tailoring exports for cartels, exploiting gaps in export monitoring and the dual-use nature of many chemicals. Despite China's broad scheduling of fentanyl-class substances in 2019 and periodic bilateral pledges to target illicit flows, precursors and non-scheduled analogs remain a critical vulnerability, slipping through with slight formula tweaks or misdeclared shipments. In practice, customs agencies face an arms race. New analogs, new codes, new paperwork, same end use. U.S. sources credit China's 2019 scheduling with reducing direct fentanyl mail shipments, even as precursor and analog traffic persisted. Washington has pressed Beijing on export oversight and subsidies questions and pursued sanctions and designations against cartel-linked chemical networks. To grasp why the Port of Houston became a focal point, follow the volume and the machinery. Houston's container traffic has surged to record levels in recent years, crossing 4.1 million TEUs in 2024 and continuing strong growth into 2025. High throughput means more legitimate trade and more camouflage for illicit consignments. It also means CBP must lean on non-intrusive inspection tech, high-energy X-ray and gamma systems, radiation portal monitors, and advanced targeting that flags containers by risk profile and content anomalies. At a port where hundreds of thousands of boxes move monthly, smart triage is the only way to find the needle in a stack of steel needles. Here's how the triage worked. In this case, automated screening flagged molecular patterns that did not match the declared commodity. That sounds like magic. It isn't. It's the combined effect of data-driven targeting and physics, non-intrusive inspection systems that peer through steel and compare what the box looks like to what the paperwork claims. When the match is off, inspectors escalate. When the escalation shows industrial drums with markings that don't fit the declared end use, they escalate again, this time to a controlled opening under hazmat protocols. CBP gets point detection, HSI brings supply chain intelligence, and DEA provides chemical analysis to confirm whether a compound can serve in an illicit synthesis pathway. The tools themselves, NII scanners, container targeting, CSI partnerships at foreign ports, are the backbone of modern port security. Follow the money, and the network takes shape. Cartel finance today is a braid, one strand through standard trade finance and shell firms, a second through informal value transfer and hawala-like brokers, and a third through crypto rails. The paperwork tries to look boring. Solvents, stabilizers, peroxides for polymer curing. Invoices reference standard customs codes. But investigators map the counterparties, cross-check beneficial ownership in Hong Kong or the BVI, and compare the flows to suspicious activity reports and previous seizures. Before long, a pattern emerges, a spiral of payments that lands at exporters clustered in industrial cities in coastal China, then jumps to freight forwarders with a history of routing creativity, then lands again in boxes bound for seaports with heavy throughput and low dwell times. That is how you hide a storm inside routine weather. Once the drums were secured, and the arrests began, the network reacted as all corporate networks do. The logistics people tried to explain it away. Wrong code, mislabeling, unaware of downstream misuse. The finance intermediaries went dark. The shell boards resigned. But you cannot resign from a pattern. When the same exporter appears in multiple consignments to different ports, with similar industrial peroxide declarations, and the same freight broker pops up in 3 routes designed to avoid certain inspection regimes, the pattern holds. And when your buyers are linked to lab sites in Sonora, Sinaloa, Arizona, and West Texas, the pattern becomes a map. Understand what was at stake here. Intelligence assessed that the materials were destined for cartel-run super labs capable of producing tons of meth per month. The strategy was to move away from risky border runs and toward domestic production with industrial inputs that could be ordered like resin or pigments and buried in the noise of normal commerce. This is how the narcotics economy has evolved in the synthetic era. You don't need fields and harvest seasons. You need precursors, catalysts, reactors, and time. That is why sanctions hit not just traffickers, but also chemical brokers, shipping agents, and lab suppliers. That is why OFAC has designated superlab facilitators tied to Sinaloa's meth and fentanyl arms, while DHS, CBP, and DOJ build cases that target the logistics skeleton, not just the street muscle. Now widen the frame. The Department of Homeland Security's threat assessments have warned for years that transnational criminal organizations are agile, tech-forward, and horizontally networked. They use encrypted apps, anonymized finance, and legitimate-looking trade routes to mask illicit flows. They are not improvising, they are iterating. And every time enforcement tightens one choke point, postal shipments, for example, the flow reconfigures around maritime freight or land cargo. That's why CBP's non-intrusive inspection program and the Container Security Initiative exist, to inspect smarter earlier and with better targeting. That is also why policy debate now circles around stronger data sharing with foreign ports, higher scanning rates at U.S. terminals, and new authorities for dual-use chemical oversight. Let's bring it back to people. Behind the sterile figures and chemical names are families and neighborhoods. Officials estimate that this single operation prevented over 15 million potential meth doses from reaching U.S. streets. That is millions of crimes not committed to feed an appetite that did not get fed. That is a parent who does not have to bury a child, a school that does not become a triage center, a city block that does not tip into battlefield. For ICE and CBP, this is more than enforcement. It is national defense. It is the protection of the domestic human terrain. And yet, the fight is not finished. Cartels will recalibrate. Another broker will step in. Another dual-use compound will be selected because its code sits in a gray zone between perfectly legal and perfectly lethal when misused. Enforcement must evolve in lockstep, better analytics, deeper cooperation with source and transit countries, more frequent high-energy scans without paralyzing trade flows, and faster financial takedowns that freeze money mid-route, not months later. Congress will be asked to fund more scanners, more data integration, more partnerships, and more authorities to police the chemical commerce frontier. The question is not whether to act, it is how fast. Public reporting underscores why speed matters. Port Houston moves extraordinary volumes, over 4 million TEUs in 2024, and record monthly totals in mid-2025, so detection must scale with flow. Now let's stitch the timeline clean and clear. June 2nd, 2025, a flagged container at the Port of Houston. Paperwork, industrial peroxides, reality dicumyl peroxide drums. Total mass 50,000 kilograms. Estimated conversion over 15 million doses. Estimated illicit value, roughly $500 million. Origin points, Chinese exporters. Intended end use, meth production capacity for cartel super labs. U.S. response, ICE HSI CBP, DA hazmat teams, federal prosecutors, and international liaison channels with Chinese counterparts. Outcome, so far seizure arrests, 15 including Tacoma-based actors, unraveling shell companies and a financial trail across Mexico, Hong Kong, and coastal China. Larger implication, a proof of concept that the cartels have matured into industrial scale. Producers whose logistics mimic legitimate multinationals. Could other shipments have slipped through? Yes, especially when traffickers pivot to non-scheduled analogs, to misdeclared cargo, and to routing tricks that exploit inspection bottlenecks. That's why you see OFAC designations on lab facilitators, DHS pushing more NII deployments, and DOJ charging not just couriers but also brokers and financiers. That is the real battlefield, now the spreadsheet, and the bill of lading. You want the military angle? Here it is. When chemical supply chains become weapons against civilian populations, the lines between law enforcement and national defense blur. Ports become forward operating bases. Scanners become sensors. Targeting centers inside CBP and HSI function like fusion cells, analyzing signals and making interdiction calls in timeframes measured in hours, not weeks. The doctrine is layered: detect, isolate, neutralize, exploit, detect the anomaly in the data, isolate the container in the yard, neutralize the hazard with hazmat protocols, Exploit the network by following the money and the manifests back to source. That is how you degrade an industrial threat without firing a shot. We are anonymous, so we will also tell you the uncomfortable part. This victory is both massive and fragile. It saved lives today, but it does not guarantee tomorrow. Synthetic drug economies are resilient because they are modular. Lose one broker, another appears. Close one HS code, with tighter control, a new formulation emerges. This is not cynicism. It is a warning to keep pressure where it hurts. Precursor controls logistics, choke points, and finance. If you want fewer drums on ships, make the drums unbuyable, the ships uninsurable for suspicious consignments, and the brokers unemployable after designations. That is how you turn a network's strengths, scale, speed, and plausible deniability against itself. We have walked you through the operation from the flag to the seizure, from the drum to the super lab, from the invoice to the arrest. We kept every detail intact because details are the chain links. You need to see the whole, the 50,000 kilograms, the industrial peroxides label, the port of Houston, the 8,000 container a day camouflage, the misdeclared paperwork, the Hong Kong shells, the encrypted wires, the hazmat seals popping under floodlights as agents lift a lid on a quiet war. All of it is the same picture viewed from different angles. Now to you, should the United States invest more in chemical detection capacity at ports, expand non-intrusive inspection coverage, and harden the dual-use chemical regime with better international enforcement? We say yes because the adversary is already thinking in spreadsheet columns, TU flows, and catalyst selections. If we do not meet that with equal sophistication, we will keep scoring heroic saves while losing the quiet war. The choice is not abstract. It is a budget line. It is a training class for an inspector who learns what a misdeclared peroxide looks like in a scan. It is a liaison officer in Shanghai who knows which exporter's invoices never quite add up.